Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. On today's same but different episode, we're going to talk about different types of flour in the market. Also, we're going to talk about the science behind gluten and what is the general purpose of these flours in the kitchen. There's a lot to cover, so let's just get straight into it. Hi new friends, this is Erica right here. I'm a Taiwanese citizen currently living in America. Cooking and traveling is my passion, so I'm here to share with you my favorite Asian recipes. On each same but different episode, I'll choose a few dishes or ingredients that is easy to be mixed up and explain the difference between them for you. And of course, at the end, we're going to teach you the Chinese pronunciation of each ingredient as well, so if that interests you, please subscribe and keep watching. Flour is probably one of the most common seen ingredient in the kitchen if you're trying to make something from scratch. You can use flour to make cake, breads, baos, dumplings, or even put it into cooking such as the creamy napa cabbage that we made last week. If you haven't seen that video yet, here's a link. Definitely check it out if you have kids. Anyways, if you're a cooking master, you probably already know the difference between each type of flour, but let's admit it, we all started somewhere. And we have all been to that stage that we're just squatting in the supermarket and wondering why is there so many different type of flour, and you end up just buying the all-purpose flour because it says it's all-purpose, and at the end that messed up your recipe. So today I'm going to explain to you the difference between each type of flour and most importantly, what type of flour to use in your recipe. Let's go! Human has been making flour for over 6,000 years since Stone Age. So first, let's talk about how the flour is made. If you don't care how flour is made, you can obviously skip this part, but if even a caveman know how to do it and you don't, well, joke's on you. Flour is made out of wheat. We all know that, right? And the harvest season for wheat is around August. When the delivery truck arrives at the mill, the first thing they do is take out a sample from the wheat. And if it passed the test, it will be sending to this cleaning machine to sieve out all the straws and sticks and only let the grains pass through. The different type of flour that you saw in the supermarket is actually made out of a combination of different type of wheat. So on the next step, they will blend the different type of wheat grains together to create the right kind of flour formula. This step is called grinding. Each grain of the wheat is actually its own seeds. And the grain has three most important parts, which from the outside in is the bran, endosperm, and germ. The bran, which is basically the skin of the grain. The endosperm is what the flours are made out of. Last is the germ, which is exactly the part that grows into a new plant for the grain. The milling happens in this machine called plant shifter. The process is to not just grind the grains, but also separate the different part of grain for different purpose. The bran can be used to feed animals and also put into some baking products. The endosperm is the part that we grind it into flour later. Then the germ is most sold into the health food market because all the nutrition is actually inside this little part of the seeds. And also don't forget the byproducts. It will be sent to the farm and feed the livestock. The refined flour has had the fiber-rich bran and the oil-rich germ removed, so all it remains is basically just protein and starch. So that's why the whole grain bread is extra nutritious, because it's made out of the whole grain with nothing removed and all the goods still be inside of it. But since all the nutritious part of the grain are stripped out from the flour, before packaging, the mill will enrich the flour with vitamins and minerals to replace the nutrition sometimes. So here it is how the flour is made. Pretty cool, right? I always like to watch how it's made. So how does flour turn into dough really when you add in water to it? Have you think about that? There's actually two types of different gluten protein in the flour, which are the gliadin and the glutenin, if I pronounce it right. When these proteins come in contact with water, they will start to hold their hand and combine to form the protein called gluten. The gluten has an elastic characteristic and can be stretched and create a membrane. So the takeaway here is that the higher the protein content is in the flour, the more water it can absorb and the more gluten it creates. And the more gluten is in there, the stretchier the membrane is. Here are the three most common seen flour in the supermarket here in the US. The bread flour, all-purpose flour, and the cake flour. The difference between these three types of flour is the protein content. Let's start with the highest protein content flour, the bread flour. Bread flour's protein content is around 11 to 13.5%. It's called a bread flour is because most of the bread recipe require a higher protein content to create lots of gluten for the bread. Like we said earlier, the stronger the gluten, the more stretchier the dough is. So the membrane it creates can trap more air bubble inside the dough and let it rise higher while baking. The lowest protein content out of the three flour that we're talking about today is the cake flour. It is normally labeled around 7 to 9% of the protein. It is always very finely ground and have been treated with chlorine so it can carry more sugar and fat for the dessert that we're making. So for the same concept, the lower the protein content, the less gluten it creates. That means the taste of the final product will be more soft, more spongy, or crispy. It is mostly used in the cake or biscuits recipe and also the pancakes. In the Chinese cuisine, cake flour is actually widely used in the pastry as well. And just like the Napa cabbage casserole recipe that we made last week, the cake flour can be used to thicken up the sauce sometimes in Chinese recipe because of the relatively higher starch ratio in this flour. Last but not least is finally our all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour protein content is around 10 to 12%. Even though it's been called all-purpose flour, it doesn't mean that you can use for all-purpose. Although it's definitely the most versatile flour out of the three. In Chinese recipe, we use all-purpose flours for our buns, baos, beans, noodles, and dumplings. Just by changing the ratio of the liquid content in the recipe and also the cooking method, all-purpose flour can be used in so many different types of recipes. Even though the protein content is the main difference between each type of flour, and supposedly the more protein it writes on the package, the more gluten there's supposed to be in our dough. But there's still other factors such as the nature of the gluten itself and also if the flour are bleached or not that make the different brands and type of flour unique. So after all, the flour varies significantly among the brands and the region of the country. So when you're following a recipe, try to use the exact same brand and type of flour specified in the recipe or be aware of the possible needs of adjustments. If you only have all-purpose flour at home, theoretically you should be able to add in some starch into your all-purpose flour and make it a more tender texture to your recipe. And on the other hand, you can also add in a few spoonfuls of the vital gluten to improve the elasticity on your dough. Making vital gluten is very easy. Just simply use the flour and water, combine it into a dough, and then put it into a bucket of water and wash off all the starch in it. After you wash off all the starch, there will only be gluten left in the dough. And that's our vital gluten. Whoa, let it soak in. There's a lot of information in here. I've also learned a lot about flour while I'm making this video, so if you don't mind, please kindly give this video a thumbs up. It's really helped a lot. But anyways, thank you for watching my video to the end. I upload a video on YouTube every Thursday, so if you like my content, remember to hit that bell and you'll never miss out. Last but not least, don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you next Thursday. Bye! The word of the day today is 面粉. 面粉 means flour. And today we introduced three types of different flour for you: the cake flour, all-purpose flour, and also the bread flour. In Chinese, we just simply call them the high gluten flour, medium gluten flour, and the low gluten flour. And the character 精 means gluten. And the first character of each flour, the 高, 中, 低, means high, medium, and low. So the bread flour is the high gluten flour, which is 高筋面粉. And the all-purpose flour, which is the medium gluten flour, we call it 中筋面粉. And last but not least, the cake flour, which is the lowest gluten flour, we call it 低筋面粉. Okay, this time, bye for real.